My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm 64, old enough to know the difference between a rude comment and a moment that permanently changes the way you see your own family. I was sitting at my son's Thanksgiving table in suburban Pennsylvania, the kind of warm, staged setting where people post photos and pretend everything is fine. I just set down the cranberry relish I make every year, still smelling faintly of citrus and cloves, when the turkey landed in the center of the table like a final cue. My daughter-in-law, Lauren, came up behind me. I felt her hand clamp around my upper arm, firm and cold, like she'd already decided I was something she could move. Before I could even turn my head, she yanked. My chair scraped the hardwood so sharply that everyone flinched. I didn't fall, but my dignity did. Lauren leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume and hear her voice clearly over the polite chatter. "My parents don't need you here," she said. "Just get out." I turned to my son. "Daniel," because that's what a mother does right before she admits the world has shifted. Daniel sat there with the carving knife in his hand, eyes fixed on his plate like it held instructions for how to disappear. He didn't say a word. And in that silence, I understood something that made my throat burn. Love can die in an instant, but paperwork doesn't. The front door shut behind me with a soft click, like the house wanted to pretend nothing ugly had happened. The cold air outside hit my face so cleanly, it almost felt like a slap. Porch lights and tidy lawns and quiet streets. Everything looked normal, which made what had just happened feel even more unreal. I walked to my car without rushing. I wasn't going to give Lauren the satisfaction of watching me scramble. I wasn't going to hand Daniel the excuse of thinking I'd overreacted. I wanted my body to say what my mouth couldn't manage yet. I still belonged to myself. When I slid into the driver's seat, my hands shook just enough that my keys chimed against the ignition. I stared at them for a second, then started the engine and drove to the end of the street. I stopped at the corner and just sat there, because my mind wasn't replaying the scene like a movie the way I expected it to. It was cataloging it. Lauren's grip, the scrape of the chair, the exact moment Daniel looked away. My phone sat in my lap. Daniel's contact was right there. My thumb hovered, and for a moment I felt two instincts rise at once. One wanted to call and cut him with words sharp enough to leave a mark. The other wanted to beg. I hate admitting that. Begging is humiliating, and I'd spent my entire adulthood learning how not to need anyone's permission to stand upright. I didn't call. I drove to a grocery store parking lot that stays open all night. It was bright and public and safe. One of those places where no one asks questions because everyone is minding their own fatigue. I turned off the engine and listened to the ticking of the hood cooling. My breath fogged the windshield in little bursts. In the passenger seat was the pumpkin pie I'd baked the night before. I'd wrapped it in foil and stuck a note on top that said, "Happy Thanksgiving," because that's what you do when you're trying to keep traditions alive. The foil was still smooth, untouched. That was the detail that broke through the shock and went straight into my chest. Not her hand on my arm. Not her words. The pie. Because it meant I hadn't just been thrown out of a room. I'd been erased from the ritual, from the story they were telling themselves about who mattered and who didn't. I leaned my head back against the seat and let my eyes close. My husband, Frank, had been gone 3 years. He used to say families were like old houses, beautiful, full of history, and always one storm away from revealing what was rotten underneath. When he died, I told myself I would be the one to keep the family steady. I would keep showing up. I would keep loving Daniel through whatever phase he was in. Tonight, I understood that showing up doesn't guarantee you're welcome. I opened my purse and pulled out a small notebook. It was the kind of notebook women my age carry without thinking. Addresses, reminders, the occasional recipe scribble. I flipped to a blank page and wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote what happened, line by line, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted reality. I wrote the time dinner started. I wrote who was in the room, Lauren's parents, Daniel, Lauren, me. I wrote what I brought and where I set it down. I wrote exactly what Lauren said. I wrote what Daniel did. Nothing. That's what I wrote for him. Nothing. When I finished, I stared at the page until the ink stopped looking wet. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and clean, the kind of anger that doesn't make you scream. It makes you focus. My life had taught me that when people are willing to humiliate you in public, they will also try to rewrite it in private. Not if I didn't let them. I called my sister, Marjorie. She answered on the second ring, her voice already edged with worry. "Evie, what's wrong?" "I need somewhere to go," I said. "Just for tonight?" There was a pause, and then certainty. "Come here. I'll leave the porch light on." The drive to Marjorie's house felt longer than it should have. I kept expecting tears. They didn't come. What came instead was a strange calm, sharp enough to feel unnatural, like my mind had decided falling apart would have to wait. Because somewhere between that dining room and that dark road, I realized something else. If Daniel could sit there and let me be dragged out like an inconvenience, then whatever I thought our relationship was, it wasn't that anymore. And I needed to protect what was left of my life from people who had learned to treat me like furniture. When I pulled into Marjorie's driveway, the porch light was on, bright as a beacon. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My cheeks were pale. My eyes looked older. I whispered, just to hear the words out loud. "This isn't happening again." Then I stepped into the cold, carrying my untouched pie like a fragile, ridiculous proof that I had tried. Marjorie didn't bombard me with questions. She took one look at my face, took the pie from my hands like it mattered, and wrapped her arms around me in a hug that didn't ask permission. "You're safe," she murmured, like I was 12 instead of 64. That was when my throat finally tightened. I didn't sob. I didn't collapse. I just stood there and let my body register what my pride had been refusing to admit. I had been hurt. She made tea the way she always does when life turns ugly, strong, a little oversteeped, with too much honey. We sat at her kitchen table, the kind with nicks and scratches from decades of real use. No centerpiece and no performance, just the quiet truth of two sisters. I told her what happened. I kept it plain. The scene didn't need embellishment. When I got to the part where Daniel said nothing, my voice went flat without me trying. Marjorie's eyes flashed. He just let her do that? I stared at the steam rising from my mug. "Yes." She tapped my notebook. "Is that a timeline?" "So I don't gaslight myself," I said. That got a sharp, humorless laugh out of her. "Good, because I promise you, they're going to try." She was right. I could already hear Lauren's version of events forming in my head. Evelyn overreacted. Evelyn misunderstood. Evelyn was lonely. Evelyn is dramatic. When women my age speak up, people love to label it instability. It's easier than admitting they were wrong. I went to bed in Marjorie's guest room, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there staring at the ceiling and thinking about money in the way you do when you've learned, slowly, that money isn't just comfort. It's leverage. It's also a leash, if you're not careful. For years, I had helped Daniel quietly. Nothing flashy. I wasn't handing him cash for vacations, but when the roof leaked, I paid for the repair. When the dishwasher died, I covered it. When they were short one month because Lauren switched jobs, I filled the gap. I told myself that was what mothers did. I told myself it was love. In the dark, I wondered if it had been training. In the morning, I made coffee and sat at Marjorie's table with my notebook open. I wrote down details I hadn't included the night before, where Lauren's parents were sitting, how Lauren's mother kept her eyes down like she didn't want to be seen witnessing it, the way Lauren waited until the turkey was on the table, like she wanted an audience for the moment she erased me. That wasn't a loss of control. That was a choice. Marjorie watched me write and asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" The question sat between us. I stared at my own handwriting and realized how tired I was. Tired of being the person who smooths everything over. Tired of pretending the smallest humiliations don't count. "I don't want to destroy him," I said. "I don't want to torch my son." Marjorie's voice stayed calm. "I didn't ask what you wanted. I asked what you're going to do." That afternoon, I called Michael Rosen, the attorney who had helped Frank and me for years. He answered the phone himself. "Evelyn," he said, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you today." "I wasn't expecting to be thrown out of Thanksgiving dinner," I replied. There was a pause that felt like the world leaning closer. "Tell me what happened," I told him, calmly. I heard myself describe the grip, the chair scrape, the words, the silence. When I finished, Michael didn't fill the air with outrage. He asked questions. "Did she leave marks?" "Yes," I said. "A bruise on my upper arm." "Any witnesses besides your son?" "Her parents." "And your son said nothing?" "No." Michael exhaled slowly. "All right. Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to make a scene. We're going to protect you first." Something in me unclenched at that, not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded me I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a child pushed into the cold. I was a grown woman with rights and a history and a life I had built. Michael asked about the house Daniel lived in, whether my name was on any paperwork, whether I had contributed to improvements. I told him about the roof, the appliances, the little gaps. He asked if I had records. I told him I could find them. "Good," he said, "because the story matters, and proof matters more." 2 days later, Marjorie drove me to Michael's office. I brought my notebook and a folder of printed bank statements she helped me pull. When I rolled up my sleeve and showed the bruise, it had turned that sick yellow-purple that makes people's faces tighten. Michael studied it and said quietly, "That's not nothing." I expected him to suggest a lawsuit immediately. Instead, he leaned back and asked, "Evelyn, do you want a relationship with your son after this?" The question felt like pressure on a tender place. "I don't know if I have one now," I admitted. He nodded, like he'd heard that before. "Then we move carefully. We document. We set boundaries in writing. We give your son a path to do the right thing. And if they push, we escalate." When we left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Mom, Lauren says things got out of hand. Can we talk?" Got out of hand. Like it was a spilled drink. Like my body hadn't been yanked from a chair. Like his silence hadn't been the loudest part. I stared at the message, then typed slowly. "We can talk, but not alone, and not without boundaries." I sent it before I could second-guess myself, because I could feel the old habit trying to return, the habit of accepting disrespect just to keep the illusion of family intact. And I was done with illusions. Michael drafted the letter on heavy paper with a clean header, the kind that makes people sit up straighter when they read it. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a threat. It was structure. It stated what happened at Thanksgiving. It requested that Lauren not contact me directly for now. It offered a controlled conversation with Daniel facilitated through counsel if he wanted to repair anything. It also requested documentation and acknowledgement of the financial support I'd provided, because once numbers are on a page, people stop pretending they don't matter. Michael mailed it certified, not because I enjoyed the formality, but because formality is what you use when someone might try to rewrite history. 2 days later, Daniel called. His voice sounded thin. "Mom, do we really need lawyers involved?" I wanted to say. "Do we really need you to sit silent while your wife drags me out of a chair?" But I didn't. That kind of sentence burns hot and dies fast. "We need structure," I said, because what happened wasn't a misunderstanding. And I'm not having this conversation with you while Lauren is in the background coaching you. He swallowed. I could hear it. "She's scared," he said. "That makes 2 of us," I replied. "The difference is, I didn't put my hands on anyone." Daniel went quiet, then said, almost pleading, "She didn't mean to hurt you." That sentence made something in me go still. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice level, "she meant to remove me. The bruise is just proof she didn't care what it took." He didn't argue. His silence was familiar now, like a room I'd been locked in too many times. Michael scheduled a meeting for the following week. Daniel agreed to come alone. Lauren, according to Michael, preferred to submit a statement. Even through a lawyer's polite phrasing, I could hear what it really meant. She wanted control without consequences. On the day of the meeting, I wore a navy sweater and small earrings Frank bought me years ago. I wasn't dressing for court. I was dressing for myself. I wanted to walk in as a woman with a spine, not a character in someone else's story. Daniel arrived looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes darted toward my arm, then away, as if seeing the bruise might force him to admit something real. "Hi, Mom," he said. I nodded once. "Daniel?" Michael didn't let the conversation drift into emotional fog. He asked Daniel to describe what happened on Thanksgiving. In his own words, Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He rubbed his palms on his jeans like a nervous teenager, which would have been almost funny if it hadn't been heartbreaking. "She was upset," he said. "Lauren, about boundaries." Michael's pen moved. "And in response to that, she physically removed your mother from a chair in front of guests." Daniel flinched at the plainness of it. "It wasn't like that," he muttered. "It was exactly like that," I said quietly. "You watched it happen." Daniel's eyes lifted to mine, and for a second, I saw the boy again, the one who used to cry when he thought he'd disappointed me. "I froze," he whispered. "I didn't know what to do." That admission hit me harder than any apology would have, because it was honest, and because it meant the problem wasn't only Lauren. The problem was that my son had become the kind of man who freezes when it matters most. Michael let the silence sit, then asked, "Daniel, do you want your mother in your life?" Daniel's face tightened like the question physically hurt. "Yes," he said, but the words sounded small. "Then you need to understand what she needs." Michael replied, "Not what keeps the peace in your house. What your mother needs." Daniel looked at me, and his voice cracked. "What do you need?" I had imagined saying something sharp, something that would make him feel my pain. But when the moment arrived, what came out was simple. "I need to know that if someone puts their hands on me in your home," I said, "you will stand up every time. I need to know I won't be humiliated as the cost of being included." His head bobbed quickly. "Yes, I will, I swear. And I need us to stop pretending the money doesn't matter," I added, because this was the part he would hate. "I've helped you for years, quietly. If Lauren wants me out, then I'm out of the role she benefits from, too." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not—" He stopped himself, as if he heard how childish it sounded even before he finished. Michael slid a document across the table. "These are documented reimbursements for specific contributions and repairs," he said. "This isn't punishment. It's separation. Clean lines." Daniel stared at the numbers like they were written in a language he didn't want to learn. Then his shoulders sagged. "I didn't realize it added up like that," he said. "It always adds up," I told him. "That's what adulthood is." When Daniel left, Michael looked at me and said, "You handled that well." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, because the meeting confirmed something I'd been trying not to name. Daniel wasn't choosing me out of understanding. He was choosing the path that kept his life from collapsing. A week later, through counsel. Lauren agreed to sign a civil acknowledgement and to reimburse the documented contributions over time. Daniel agreed to a formal arrangement. If there was contact, it would be on neutral ground, with basic respect spelled out like terms in a contract. It wasn't warm. It wasn't sentimental. It was real. And when the papers arrived at Marjorie's house, I read every line twice before signing my part, because I knew this wasn't the end. This was the point where I decided what I would become after it. The settlement didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief with a cleaner ending. I kept staring at the page where Lauren's name sat in ink, formal and final, and thinking about how strange it was that respect had to be negotiated like a lease agreement. In the days after, I found myself thinking less about Lauren and more about the quiet pattern underneath everything, how easily an older person becomes movable, how quickly mom turns into in the way. I thought about the bruise on my arm, not because it hurt, but because it was proof that humiliation can come disguised as family drama. Michael introduced me to an elder advocate he trusted, someone who worked with people who didn't have the resources I did, people whose adult children took control of their finances in the name of helping. Marjorie found a small community center that rented office space by the hour. I didn't announce anything with cameras or speeches. I wasn't trying to punish anyone publicly. I was trying to build something practical. I started a modest local effort called the Carter Autonomy Project, focused on connecting older adults to reliable legal referrals and basic counseling resources when family dynamics turn coercive. No grand promises, no hero complex, just structure, so people could stop doubting their own reality the way I almost did. The first person who came in was a man in his 70s holding a folder like it weighed 100 pounds. His daughter had borrowed his debit card to help him pay bills, and now he needed permission to buy groceries. He wasn't angry. He was embarrassed. That embarrassment looked painfully familiar. I listened, and my throat tightened in a way it hadn't since Thanksgiving, because suddenly it wasn't just my story. It was a pattern. Daniel called about a month later. His voice was cautious, like he was approaching something that might bite. "Mom," he said, "Lauren wants to apologize." I took a slow breath. "Does she?" I asked. "Or do you want her to?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "I don't know." That honesty was not redemption, but it was a crack in the wall. "I'm not shutting the door forever," I told him. "But I'm not opening it to the same behavior. If she wants to apologize, she can put it in writing. If we meet, it'll be in public, respectfully." "Yes," he said. "Okay." The next Thanksgiving, I didn't go to their house. I didn't sit alone in the dark, either. Marjorie and I cooked together. Simple food for two people who refused to perform happiness for anyone else. When we sat down, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said. I looked at my plate, at the steady light in her kitchen, and felt a quiet kind of peace settle into my chest. I hadn't won because I got lucky. I hadn't won because someone swooped in to save me. I won because I stopped trading my dignity for a seat at someone else's table. And that isn't revenge. That's structure. That's survival. That's what you do when you finally decide you're not disposable.